Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you to Expo and Northern Trust. It is my distinct pleasure to be here today with Sarah, Chiwoniso, and Rachel to talk about non-traditional education structures and just, really dig into just sort of how they, through their organizations, are helping artists. And so first, I just wanted to get started by asking just sort of how you each got into this. How did you start to, explore your relationship with helping artists and doing so through, non-traditional education structures? Where did it start? Who wants to go?
Okay, I can start. This is actually like the last place I ever thought I would be right now. I come from really a family of artists. And so as my form of rebellion, I was like, well, I'm going to be a geneticist. And so, one of the amazing things that was so impactful that I only realized looking back was that every interactions with my grandparents, who were, an incredibly powerful force in my life, revolved around the arts. The time that we spent together, we were going to the symphony, we were going to the ballet. If we were traveling together, we were going to the museums. So I was really lucky in that the arts were always a part of my life. But I was like, great, I'm going to be a biology major. And so I did that for 2 years. And I knew that my grandparents had founded an organization called YoungArts. But I was not, I think, particularly engaged with it, didn't really understand it. And one year I was a sophomore in college, and it was holiday break, and my grandmother invited me to the YoungArts Gala with her. And I said yes, not because I was particularly interested in the organization, but because I was like, I'm going to go hang out with my grandma. And I went, and the mother of one of the visual arts winners that year, I guess, heard I was part of the family who founded the organization. And she came up to me with tears in her eyes, and she said, I have to thank you so much for everything you've done for my son. He used to come home from school and sit on the floor and draw, and I would yell at him. I would tell him to go do his real work, his math, his science. And seeing him here, being mentored by the greatest luminaries in his field, being looked at by universities for scholarship for this work, I realized that this is his real work and I have to support it. And I had an incredible aha moment, not just of the importance of young arts for the artists that were going through it, but also for the perception of the value of artists in our society. And I also, at that point, realized that if somebody from the family didn't get involved, there was a chance that the organization would not survive. And so the next morning, I went to my grandmother and I said, I want to help. And I joined the board of Young Arts. I changed my major from biology to a double major in business and French with a minor in art history. And I moved to New York, and I got involved with, a lot of other organizations in New York, and kind of the rest is history. And it was, I look at who I get to work with today, and it was the greatest decision of my life.
Amazing. Chiwoniso, what about you? What sort of began your journey to where you are now?
It's a bit of a personal crusade for me. I am not from here, in case that's not, apparent by the way I speak. I was born in a country called Zimbabwe. It is in Africa, and I moved to the United States as an adult. And even though I lived in sort of Harare, where I'm from, is this big, bustling African city, it's still very isolated. And I thrived on reading books. Like, literature was my portal to this external world. And I'm old enough to have I'm pre-internet, pre-social media. So consuming art and culture was sort of always the thing for me. I did everything. I painted. I was a ceramicist. I loved making, my parents got me a camcorder. I loved making, little videos. But reading was always the thing. I was a theater kid, all of that. Regardless of that, I sort of had a similar thing, despite sort of being steeped in the arts as a child. I went off to law school for whatever reason, and then after that, headed off into like a stint in investment banking of all things, and then a stint in tech. And then, who knows what, my decision-making process was. But the thread through all of this is I never sort of lost my love for art. And when I decided to sort of shift my career into arts administration, it just started speaking to me. Like, everything I had learned in sort of the legal field, the tech field, all of that just sort of fed into this passion I have of running organizations that support artists. This is my third executive directorship. Before this, I ran 2 arts education organizations, all in New York City. And I feel right at home. I feel like this is exactly where I should be.
Amazing. Rachel?
My turn. Well, my journey started here in Chicago at the Art Institute.
Amazing.
Where I went to undergrad and thought I was going to be an artist, and very quickly figured out that I wasn't one. But sort of stumbled into the gallery world, running the Student Union Galleries. It was called SUGS at the time. Now it's called Sight, I believe. And then, interning with Andrew Rafis at Bucket Rider, and just my journey was really, I wanted just to be around artists. My entire family are in the medical profession. So I did the other thing. They're like, you're going to be a doctor. I'm like, nope. I'm going to art school. So I found myself really drawn to curating. I'd say that that's my number one passion. That's what I went to graduate school for in San Francisco. But then, just wanting to be around artists and sort of help facilitate the creation of new work. And when the opportunity came up to work at Bemis, it made a lot of sense for me because it was multidisciplinary, and the fact that, so many artists get to, do what they want there. But I could curate, I could work, as the director of the residency program and facilitate that educational part of, the work, and also do public programs and performances and things like that. So always bringing new things to Omaha.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So we're here to talk about non-traditional models for artist education. And I wanted to ask sort of just in general, like, how would you say that your organizations provide something that a traditional education structure can't? What does YoungArts and MacDowell and Bemis bring to the table that just wouldn't be possible in a sort of traditional environment? And I know it's an enormous question, but just kind of in general, just like what makes it different, I guess. What makes your organization different than, a traditional education structure for artists? Who wants to start?
So, the reason YoungArts was founded was because my grandfather wanted to be a concert pianist, and he did not find the support from his family, the educational system, or the community at large to pursue that. Everybody said, go get a real job.
Mm-hmm.
And, he did. And when he reached a point that he was able to give back, he looked at my grandmother and he said, I never want another young, talented, aspiring artist to go through what I went through. I want them to have everything they need to pursue an education and a career in the arts. And he started YoungArts. And I think what has been incredibly unique about YoungArts since its inception in 1981, are a few things. One is that they're recognizing artists in high school. Yeah. And I think very frequently, if there's a high school student that says, I want to be an artist, everybody's like, they're there, that's cute. But if you look at our winners, the talent and time and passion and dedication they've put in, like, they get on stage and you would never in a million years think this is a, high school production. Mm-hmm. I also think the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary aspect of it is very important. I think even now, if you look at art schools, you will have your architects here, your writers here, your dancers here, and they very rarely have the opportunity to meet each other, to experience each other's work, or to collaborate. And, with YoungArts, during YoungArts Week, we do have, kind of master classes like within one discipline, but we also have interdisciplinary classes where we'll put a writer with a filmmaker and a choreographer and say, here's half a day and some equipment, go make something. And, that opportunity I think is very rare. And there are so many winners that come out of the week that say, I came in thinking of myself as a cellist and I left thinking of myself as an artist. And I think the freedom to experiment with artists of other disciplines and experiment with other disciplines is something that is still very difficult in the field today, and something that young artists is kind of uniquely poised to offer. And, there's also coming from, a medical, the pre-med background, experimentation and failure was always expected. Mm-hmm. It was, you are going to test a hypothesis hundreds of times before you find the solution. And I think with artists, and this happens in a lot of programs, a lot of residencies, you are always expected to have a finished product. Yeah. And where are the time, space, and resources to experiment and to fail? And providing that, I think, is also something that can be so transformative to artists that we work with.
I'm just going to jump in there because I love
Please,
that.
yeah.
And that's exactly what, we say at Bemis. And while, our residents are usually post, bachelor's or master's, they are given that time and space to experiment. They're brought together around 10 to 12 at a time so they can work with each other. They can learn from each other. I think that is sort of this alternative education that doesn't necessarily happen in grad school because it feels really competitive. Whereas at Bemis, it feels really free. We have no expectation. You don't have to have a show. You don't have to leave a work for the collection. You can just be. You can sleep. If you need to sleep for 3 months, you can do that.
Can I sleep for 3 months?
Sure. You have to get in first. But then we have, staff support in order, to teach you new skills or to hone, maybe skills that you haven't had for a while, haven't been using. We have partnerships throughout the city, so you can kind of go out and learn how to work in a foundry or, do digital fabrication. And then we do have an internship program. So there's this idea of like mentorship that happens with the residents, with artists, younger, college-aged artists in Omaha to be able to like work one-on-one and kind of be a studio assistant, learn what that's like. And that's been really super successful. And residents have continued to stay in touch with their interns, even like fly them out for a show, like, oh, you helped me with this. I want you to come back and continue to help me. And I love that part of it because it's definitely continued to drive that idea of, working together and learning from each other.
I was recently on our MacDowell campus in New Hampshire, and I had dinner with one of our artists in residence, Marcus Fisher, who had actually just done a residency at Bemis.
He's a board member of mine.
And he's one of Rachel's board members.
Love that.
Small world up here.
It's a small world. And when I was just like sort of looking into the Young Arts archives, so many Young Arts fellows have been through sort of the Sarah and Clive Chang experience. So, I do see it's a continuum, it's a pipeline. If you are in this ecosystem, you're going to have experiences, of on a spectrum of different kinds. And I think what Young Arts provides and what Bemis provides is some of the things that MacDowell provides. But I think, what we do is the kind of education that is not technical. We're a residency. We're in the woods. You are going to an isolated place to have a private studio for a number of weeks to unlock your creativity. There's not an art teacher in sight. There's not a literature professor in sight. I mean, some of your fellow artists in residence might be that. But really what we are giving you is the same that these other organizations give you. It's time and space and isolation and freedom to create, to educate yourself. Because the opportunity you have is to be quiet and silence the distractions and figure out how you are going to be your own teacher and your own advocate in this journey as you as an artist. That's really what we're providing and what makes us different. And similarly to Bemis, if you want to go in the woods and, sleep in your studio for 8 weeks, fine. No one's going to stop you. But we hope while you're sleeping, some process is happening internally that is fomenting your practice.
Just shut me off of that. I wanted to ask just, what exactly can a residency program provide burgeoning artists that, traditional education structure can't? What you were just talking about that experience of being alone in the woods, but like what else does each of your residency programs like really give an artist in training that they can't get from the academy or a traditional like education model?
I mean, I can sort of continue this thread.
Yeah.
MacDowell is an unusual experience. We are the oldest artist residency in the country. We were founded in 1907. And I think, something that's said about us is that we're the blueprint from which other artist residencies sort of created their programs. And that's true in a way. It is an incredible experience to be away from your regular life. So you could be doing an MFA in the city or a residency somewhere, somewhere urban. It is an incredible experience to be away from your family. You go solo and you go to this place that is isolated as a rural area in New Hampshire, and you're in a studio where you cannot see other studios. That's how big our property is. And you are alone with your craft. You do not have to think about groceries, paying for groceries. You do not have to think about your childcare. You've arranged that. You've left the kiddos at home. You are in this place where Chef Eric Johansson will make your breakfast, will make your lunch, will make your dinner. Deb Marsh, our housekeeper, will make sure your accommodation is comfortable. Your community of artists there will make sure that you are being cared for and nurtured as an artist. My team up there will make sure that you're being cared for and nurtured and respected as an artist. All you have to do is be responsible for your practice and your creativity. And I don't think you can get that in an artistic environment. I call ourselves a supplemental artist education.
Wow, sign me up. I mean, that sounds amazing.
I know. I feel like I need to go. But I would say, at Bemis, and maybe some of you know this in this room, is most people, when they come, they cannot believe how much space we have.
Right.
So just the idea of being able to expand your practice, and that could be meaning literally like making it big, or the idea of being able to, I'm going to do some ceramics, I'm going to do welding, I'm going to, work in the sound studio, I'm going to have a studio visit with this curator that's coming through town. You basically get to sort of expand in that way. I think that sometimes, again, when you're in your regular life, maybe you're working a part-time job, you're trying to be in the studio, you're just not being able to think in that way. And again, having a cohort of artists around. Most, I would say half of our staff are artists as well. And then we're constantly doing, I think once a week, usually we have some sort of public program that you can, again, attend, if that's a lecture, a performance, a tour. So that sort of continual education. But so many people are just like, I'm going to make something really big because I have this giant studio, I have this installation space. Highwen actually was just at Bemis. And just being able to sort of think about that expansion is what I would say.
I think to pick up on what she was saying about the ecosystem, when my grandparents founded YoungArts, it was really about that critical juncture from high school to college. And, they did that for decades and did it really, really well. But, we decided we really wanted to kind of serve an artist throughout their entire life.
Yeah.
But we have 23,000 alumni across 10 different disciplines around the world.
It's incredible.
So one organization can't do that. And so we started setting up a network of cultural partners. And I think Sundance is actually a great example. 10 years ago, Sundance launched a program called Ignite, which was for filmmakers 18 to 25. And I said, listen, we have the best filmmakers in the country, 15 to 18. Can we just funnel them into your program? And that's what we did. And it was amazing. And now we have over 50 cultural partners around the country. And I think an amazing example is a dancer and choreographer named Shamel Pitts. He has a company called Tribe. And during the pandemic, our campus was closed, our campus in Miami. And we gave it to him for a dance residency. We said, just take the space.
The whole thing.
Wow. Yes, one of the buildings. There's 2 buildings. Take the space, take the time, see what happens. And we could see that he had started something there.
Yeah.
And so from there, we then sent him to Jacob's Pillow, which is another one of our cultural partners. And then we sent him to the Center for Art and Performance in UCLA, another cultural partner. And then it ended up at New York Live Arts, who's another cultural partner. And so it really was this kind of ecosystem of support that I think is the best way to approach things, because I think if we kind of think about it in the siloed ways of support, that's just not going to work. And kind of also to the point of, traditional education systems, you might come out of art school knowing technically how to be an artist, but you don't know how, to deal with a gallery that's asking you to sign a contract, and you don't know how to deal with marketing yourself. And there are so many other aspects. And I think there are a lot of residencies that are really addressing this now. I think Titus Kaffar does a great job at Next Haven.
Absolutely.
That if you go there, it's great artists and they are learning art, but they are really learning kind of the business of it. And that's something that we're doing with YoungArts as well, with our fellowship and with our ARC program, is that professional development component, which can make or break the life of an artist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to that point, I wanted to ask just sort of, how do you see your legacy in terms of shaping the next generation of artists? How integral are your programs to, setting up, the class of artists who are going to be making critical work in the 2030s, the 2040s. I mean, how much do you think about that as you're sort of educating, these young artists? Big question.
I guess I will say, Stephanie Sahuko was one of our residents in 2013. And when I did a panel with her, about her work during COVID times virtually, she, pulled out all these images from her time at Bemis, and she said, so for the past 10 years, every single project that I have done, every big project stemmed from my 3 months at Bemis. I started every single one there. And so, as an artist who I think is really integral and amazing in the 2020s, right? I'm like, I think about that.
Totally.
Is that, those months there are allowing you to sort of open up your brain and maybe basically like create a sketch for what your next decade might look like because you're experimenting with things and you're meeting new people. So I would say that maybe that's part of it for us. And then, of course, all the things that we offer in terms of internships and like workshops for our local, Omaha community, and wanting, to be able to give back to them and have them sort of realize that Bemis has this really, we're always bringing in new people so that they can learn from them too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of prestige attached to being a young artist, in their cohort, and to Bemis and to MacDowell. And I think we should talk about that, because it does contribute to this idea, if you're accepted into these sort of institutions or these fellowships, these residencies, that it's a certain validation of your talent. I had a very recent conversation with an artist called Javad Nayer. He's a visual artist. And he just requested a meeting with me to tell me one specific thing, which is that MacDowell had changed his life. And I was like, okay, I hear that a lot. And he was like, no, you don't understand. I'm a corporate lawyer. I work as a lawyer. And I applied to MacDowell, first residency I've ever applied for. And I was doing my art to build my portfolio at night and in the morning before I went to my corporate law job. And I get to MacDowell and I realized I'm not actually a lawyer, I'm an artist. And these are the stories we sort of like to hear, where institutions like ours are placing you as the individual artist in an ecosystem where you can be intentional about what you're creating and take it seriously and put something into the world.
That's an amazing story.
It's for us too, I think it is, we, our winners do get a scholarship, but if you talk to basically every winner, they will not talk about the scholarship they received. They will talk about the community that they met. And, we have musicians who met 15 years ago who are still playing together today. Mm-hmm. We have one of my favorite stories. This was a long time ago. This was probably over 10 years ago. But we had a dancer who was a winner from South Carolina. And he was the only male dancer in his school. He was the only, gay male in his school. And he was from a very kind of small rural town in South Carolina. And you could tell like he was always the odd man out. He never had community. And we were watching his performance during YoungArts Week. And I was sitting next to Baryshnikov, who has been a YoungArts mentor since, the inception in the 80s. Baryshnikov Art Center in New York is one of our partners. It's our home. We do all of our programming there. And Misha looked at me, he goes, "Who's that?" And I said, "Well, that's Kyle Robinson, and he's a dancer from South Carolina." And he goes, "Okay, cool." And he walked up to Kyle at the end of his performance. He goes, "Hi, I'm Misha, and I would like you to be in my company."
That's incredible.
And these moments of connection, and again, mentors that end up being with artists for decades, people that end up meeting and working, collaborating for decades. Like that community, I think, is the most transformative part, and really making, I think, so many of these artists feel like they have a support system around them.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, I have a question for you about sort of how YoungArts focuses on, artists, early on in their career, very early when they're 15 to 18. What is it about that age that allows these sort of non-traditional education structures to be so effective in sort of harnessing and honing in on burgeoning talent, and sort of how is it so effective on burgeoning artists of that age?
I think, and I feel we did a program a number of years ago called, I think it was called Salon Series, where we paired like a very emerging artist with a very established artist in conversation. And we paired he was a jazz artist at the time, and now he's gone on to do basically every discipline you can imagine, with Glenn Ligon. And we kind of expected it to be Glenn imparting his wisdom on Samora. And it really ended up being the other way around, that Glenn said, my whole life I've wanted to try other artistic disciplines. I've wanted to collaborate with artists of other disciplines. I just feel like I don't know how to do that. And you have done it. Can you talk about that? And so I think, artists at that stage, they're less locked in. They kind of don't think about themselves as, I am a cellist, I am I am a dancer, I listen to what the artistic director or choreographer says. They have this very expansive view of the world and kind of this openness to experimenting with other artists, other disciplines, and taking them at that point and giving them the freedom at that point, I think is very transformative.
Amazing. And Rachel, Bemis is working toward a program that is going to focus on young artists as well, correct? When is that sort of launching?
Hopefully soon. So we are, part of our strategic plan is to create a formalized education program. So we don't have an educator on staff at the moment, but really my first half of my year is doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of other like-minded organizations to kind of create, a sort of structure of this program. But coming from, I used to work at the Contemporary Austin many years ago, and we had a young artist program there that would focus on high school students. And that's sort of what I'm kind of thinking about with our program, is to have a real focus on kind of a teen council, have the residents be able to work with these teenagers, not just college students, but again, high school students, on top of being able to offer just the sort of general educational like workshops and things like that. But yes, we are planning on hiring somebody in early 2026. So in case anyone knows anyone who wants to move to Omaha, which is a wonderful place to live, you can talk to me. But we're excited about it. I think that it's going to just add another layer to what we are offering our community.
Mm-hmm. And Chiwoniso, I wanted to ask just about the sort of legacy of MacDowell. It is, the blueprint for sort of art residencies, and it has this sort of looming presence in sort of cultural history of America, really. And I wanted to ask sort of like how it's sort of changed or shifted at all since you've come in, and sort of like how do you sort of approach that legacy?
I've been at MacDowell for 2 years, so in the life of a 118-year-old organization, that is a pinprick in time. So I am going to say it's going to take longer than 2 years to shift things.
Sure.
The other thing I am going to say is that it's interesting. MacDowell, for such a, I call it a heritage organization or a legacy organization, has always in its time been at the forefront. And I say this because, I spent my whole first year, we've got an incredible archive at MacDowell, 20,000 items, objects, rare books, letters. A lot of our stuff is at the Library of Congress. And I spent my whole first year like doing forensics and digging into the archives and just trying to figure out where in the conversation a 118-year-old organization fits. I meet residency directors all the time. Many are running residencies that are just 2 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old, and the conversation there seems current but different from sort of what legacy or heritage organizations have to face. MacDowell has always been forward. MacDowell has always accepted women artists. We were founded by a woman, and this is in an age before women could vote. MacDowell has always had Black and non-white artists in an age where many parts of America were still segregated. We've had fellows of different gender expressions from as early, I found a record in the 1930s, So in some ways, even though we are an old organization, we've always had our eye on this sort of expansive society and this large conversation of art, and that it should include everybody, and that is power. And I'm really sort of leaning into telling that part of our story.
And Rachel, I wanted to ask you the same question essentially. Like, how do you see yourself shifting the focus of BMS, and how do you see your tenure there? Just moving the organization forward.
Well, I've been at Bemis now for 6.5 years. Obviously, 2 of those ish were during COVID, so that was just about a year after I got there. But I think my plans, because I direct the residency, but I also am the chief curator, so I curate most of the exhibitions. We have a performance venue in our basement called Low End, so I just curated my 100th performance there.
Congratulations.
5 years, thank you. That's great, crazy. So I'm sort of in charge of all of those artistic programs, and it's something that, again, with this education program, but when I came to Bemis, we have a small artist community in Omaha. We don't have an MFA program, so there's not, a ton of movement there, but we have a great artists community, but a lot of them are like, it's not for me. And I heard that in Chicago. I heard that in Austin. I hear that everywhere. So in trying to kind of think about how to integrate Bemis and not just be this place that people are like, oh yeah, people live there, right? Really getting the residents when they come out into the community to go to things that our local artists are doing, to bring those artists back in to do programming, whether that's a workshop or a tour. And just really having it be a little bit more seamless into the fabric of Omaha. We were founded by Ree Kaneko, who was told, if you want to be an artist, you need to move to New York. And she goes, no, I'm going to be an artist here, and I'm going to bring artists here to make work, similar to how Ruth Kohler did with the Kohler residency. We were an arts and industry residency at first. So, I am excited about kind of, like I said, infiltrating Omaha, and really having that exchange. I think that's what I would like my legacy to be a little bit more. So working on that.
Amazing. And Sarah, we talked about how YoungArts focuses on artists who are, quite very much at the beginning stages of their careers, but you also support artists as they go on later into their careers. And how does YoungArts help, its graduates in ways that traditional education models couldn't really, or how, I guess, how does it help in ways that the other models can't?
I think that's something that we're really focused on because, like I said, there was a time in YoungArts where it was really just about that critical juncture from high school to college, and we, I think, have been very deliberate about wanting to be there throughout their entire lifetime. And it is through our network of cultural partners and relationships that I think we can say we have a whole ecosystem of support for you. But it's also through programs like ARC, the Artist Resource Collective, which is very much about professional development. And, even questions of how do I, get a mortgage for an apartment? Like these are all things that we want to make available to everybody who has gone through our program. And I think even talking to our cultural partners, making sure that I feel like, Pratt is doing a little bit of the same programming. There are a lot of organizations that are kind of thinking about the same thing and saying, can this be a collective resource? Can this be something that, having these resources available, having somebody who can talk about signing with an agent, somebody who can talk about signing with a manager, somebody who can talk about, buying an apartment, whatever it might be, having those resources. The fellowships that we're doing now, which is $30,000, but you have somebody with you every step of the way to figure out what do you want to do with that money? What do you want to do with this kind of time, space, and freedom? And, really being there to think through, I think, every phase of your career, every phase of your life. And, the times that we're living in, we went from COVID, where we were one of the founding organizations for artist relief. And, we were just very involved in relief for the LA fires. We're kind of in a moment where it just feels like one catastrophe after another for our community, unfortunately. And how do we make sure that there always is a community there? Whether it's micro grants, whether it's emergency micro grants, But just feeling like you always have somebody to come to.
And how is this the sort of current, sort of philanthropic landscape, like aiding and helping, each of your organizations? Is there sort of, a wellspring of support? Or is it difficult? I mean, just walk me through that a little bit.
It's a perilous time, let's put
Yeah.
it that way. If you are a nonprofit that relies on funding from federal sources, I think you've seen that pulled out from underneath you. In the case of MacDowell, we're quite fortunate that most of our funding comes from private major donors or institutional funders. The first few months of this year have been sort of this waiting game of seeing how our institutional funders are going to respond. And fortunately, we have had signals that they are all in to support a thriving artistic sector. But things are very uncertain, I would say. Who can tell what's going to happen tomorrow, a year from now?
Very true.
It's tenuous, and it's very tenuous, and it's very difficult. And I don't necessarily kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel at this moment. But I do keep saying that it is through collaboration that I think we're all going to make it through, because, thinking about time, money and energy, if we kind of collaborate, it will, I think, lessen the stress on so many of these organizations going into a time where I feel like there is a lot of uncertainty.
I mean, I'm just going to echo that because I think, we'll see. We're also not so reliant on federal funding. Of course, we get NEA funding, or did, but we're just hoping that other people are going to step up, and we are seeing that a little bit as well. So that's nice.
I am going to say one thing because I have a platform in this audience, and I think, to Sarah's point, there is a moment we have for people who love art and artists and care about art and artists to really step in and fill this void. And I think I'm guessing everyone in this room is interested in participating in this conversation in some way. Figure out how you can plug in, because it is going to be about community and collaboration and pulling together.
Yeah, before we get to the Q&A, I did want to ask just one more question on that note. How do you see this going forward? In terms of each of your organizations, not just in terms of the fundraising and all that, but just continuing to just push non-traditional education structures. What do you see as the next step for each of your organizations?
I mean, I would say for us, as we're sort of forming this education program, it's also leaning back on our alumni. I would say that most people hear about Bemis from a former Bemis resident or exhibiting artist or performer, and that network is really strong, and wanting to kind of be able to continue to work with them and continue to support them, have them kind of come back, and really, be able to sort of have that exchange, that collaboration. Because, as she said, I just had an artist in town, or resident, Haley, and she was like, Bemis literally changed my life. Everything is different now. And so wanting to be able to say, okay, so it did that. How can you then maybe help us change someone else's life?
For us, for decades, YoungArts really was only in Miami, and we would fly all of the mentors and all of the winners into Miami, and then we expanded kind of Miami, New York, and LA. We would have some programming in DC at the Kennedy Center. We're not doing that anymore. As we were thinking about how do we continue to be there of the lifetime of an artist, we're really thinking about serving artists where they are living and working. And so that means, we have our incredible team. One of Angela's here today, has been traveling to Nashville, because if you're a singer-songwriter, you want to go to Nashville.
Yeah.
Baltimore, Detroit, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Denver, Santa Fe, San Francisco. Really looking at where are our artists living and working, and how can we support them on the ground there? And that means not getting on a plane, but finding them a support system and a community there. And I think that's where the cultural partner model really comes in, because we don't want to have offices and staff in all these places. We want to have partners there.
Love it. Amazing.
I think the nature of artist residencies is that they're a place of solitude and retreat. And, there's a joke that my team and I have, which is we're coming out of the woods. We have
good one.
Yeah, we have literally been in the woods for over a century, and that is by design and that is intentional because we had to create this environment where our artists could come and feel the quiet to unlock their creativity. It's 2025 now, and I think the way artists work has changed. It's interesting to hear Sarah say that they are going to where the artists are, and I think for us, what we're doing, we're also sort of doing the same thing. We're the residency is the heart and soul of what we do. It is the foundation of our work. But we are, in a way, taking our, position as sort of the grandfather, grandmother, father figure, mother figure of the residency sector quite seriously and seeing how we can plug into the global dialogue about how to support other residencies and how to support this sector and what our role in that sort of world is. A lot of our, the last year for me and the team has been going all over the place, all over the world, really, and having conversations just like this and advocating for artists and art, but also the residency sector. Because I feel sometimes in this giant arts ecosystem, residencies where everything begins are sometimes such, on the fringe or the margins of it. And, where MacDowell is trying to come into the story is putting us back in the center. If you think about it, there's not a piece of art, design, literature, film, architecture that is not touched by an artist who did not go through an organization or a program like ours. You literally cannot have a day on earth without experiencing something designed by, created by someone who has not participated in one of our programs. So we are, all of that to say, we're foundational to this conversations. We need the support. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, I couldn't say it better myself. All right, so I want to thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much, Rachel, Chiwoniso, and Sarah, for being here. This was fantastic. Just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you.
was great. Thank
Thank
you all
you all.
so much.